Daddy, can you teach me how to make 3D?
So before I dive into this breakdown video of Hey Gerald, I wanted to kind of give context on why I wanted to even create a more in-depth project using these characters. So a couple months ago, I created a Gerald and Arnold character, and I mentioned in a previous video that I really liked the character, but I was looking at it after the fact and was like, I could probably push this a little bit further stylistically, and I was experimenting with some different styles over the last couple years with like some comic book textures, halftone textures, and all these different elements. And I was like, let me try to apply it to this and kind of create my own version of Arnold and Gerald, like for the 3D space. So this thinking really kind of came down to like the concept of mastery. And one book that really sticks out to me that I really like is Mastery by Robert Greene. And he talks about a lot of different concepts in there, but one of them is like refining your skills and then pushing them further, experimenting and just seeing how far you can go. So as I was looking at the finished project, an idea came to mind of what would it be like if Gerald had his own spin-off, like in a 3D environment. So I wanted to push these textures and the processes that I've been working on and experimenting with even further to create like different scenes of Gerald going about his day and doing different things, playing baseball, going to the store, making a beat, being in a talent show, and all these different things. So another concept of mastery that he talks about in the book is teaching what you learn. And I feel like once you reach a certain level of skills where you can kind of get these things out and you have the technical knowledge, that when you start to break down the process and teach other people how to do it, it kind of solidifies that knowledge that you have and makes your knowledge even stronger. So if you notice, over the last year to year and a half, I started off like posting some time-lapse videos, and after the time-lapse videos, it kind of evolved into some process breakdown videos where I'm talking about the tools that I'm using, how I'm using them, and how I piece them together to make my animations. So the cool thing about this project is that it kind of brings things full circle for me. I used to watch Arnold, a lot of Nickelodeon shows back in the day, and even 30 years ago when Toy Story first came out. I was like 12 years old and I was like, man, I would love to really get into 3D animation, but at the time it just always seemed out of reach. It was too expensive to go to school for it. So I went down a whole nother route of like making music, and then eventually got into video production and motion graphics, and then here I am making 3D art 30 years later. So I feel really fortunate to be able to like explore all of these 90s cartoons in the 3D space with a medium that I always wanted to be involved in. So for this video, I'm going to walk you through like my thought process of Hey Gerald, the different scenes that I created, and the tools that I use. I primarily use Blender, iClone for the animation, Substance Painter for texturing, and then I put it all together in After Effects, and the music and sound design was done in Ableton Live. So I appreciate y'all watching, and let's get started. I started this project off by animating the skateboard scene, and it was from the skateboard that I previously designed for Gerald and Arnold from just a still image that I rendered out about a month and a half ago. The first thing I did was I parented the skateboard to an empty and separated all of the parts out each wheel so that I can animate them separately. Once I had the skateboard set up in Blender, I hopped over to iClone, where I brought in the eye avatar of Gerald that I have from when I rigged them in AccuRig. I applied a skateboard animation for Mixamo and then used the motion layer feature to kind of go through and just adjust different parts, his hands, his feet, to make sure that his feet didn't clip through the skateboard, things like that. Once I was happy with my animation, I exported it out as an FBX and brought it back into Blender. I usually create a folder that's called Motion, and I import that animated armature into the Motion folder, and then I'll take that motion and I'll link that animation data to my finalized character of Gerald or whoever I'm working with in Blender, so that that animation that came from iClone is copied onto the armature of my final character within Blender. Once my animation was complete, I then started to work on the environment. So the first thing I did was I created just a simple cube to build out the sidewalk and size that to the correct proportion. And then I use an array modifier to duplicate it. So that way, as he is skateboarding down, he's going over what looks like the different sections of the pavement as he goes down the street. I then brought in some props from Blender Kit, Sketchfab, and other sites like that to add some more depth to the scene. So there was a trash can, there were some boxes that he drove by, empty pizza box, cans on the ground, a cone out on the street, a light, things like that. I then brought in some of those elements as well as the sidewalk itself in the street into Substance Painter to where I painted it and added some scribble marks and just overall paint layers that feel like the original look of the Gerald and Arnold character that I created. So once I bring those back into Blender with a toon shader setup that I've been using, it adds like a halftone texture in there and some brush strokes, and it all ties in to just give it like a real cool painterly hand-drawn look. Once I had everything done with the texturing and the animation, I finally set up the lighting to get the look and feel that I wanted. I wanted him to kind of be going down the street and under different street lights, so you see those lights repeat a few times, and then on one section you even see a light go by that looks like a car would be driving by and throws more light on the Gerald. Once I had that done, the final thing I did was I set up 2 orthographic cameras. The first one was a close-up of the skateboard like at his shoes, and then another one was about waist level down. And then I exported out about 240 frames at 24 frames a second for each of those camera shots. So that would give me about 20 seconds of footage that I could cut up in After Effects when I edited later on. After I did the skateboarding scene, I started to think about like, where would he be skateboarding to? And that's where the idea for like a more expanded animation came from. So one thing I kind of envision is like him walking into the neighborhood convenience store, and he's going to get like a bottle of water or a Gatorade or something at the end of the day. And this scene would just show like a part of his everyday life. And this is actually when I created like a title screen and put it over the animation. I was like, oh, let me see what can really happen with this if I kind of expand a little story out around Gerald. So the first thing I did was I purchased a model of a store for about $5. It came with like shelves and like a cooler that had drinks on it, stuff on the shelves like boxes and dishes and stuff like that. So I knew those dishes and some of those other elements wouldn't really be necessary, but I wanted to just see what it will look like first and mess with some lighting and some materials, and then after that I can go back and like replace some of the objects on the shelves themselves. So I wanted it to be nighttime, like he's going there at the end of the day, because if this is the title screen, like he does all of his things and then ends up at the store at the end of the day. So I wanted it to feel like kind of bluish. I wanted it to look like it was dark outside, so that when he walks up, you can actually kind of see like street lights out the window, things like that. So most of the work for this scene happened within the camera view. So one of the first things I did was to just set up the camera and brought Gerald in there for scale. And then I started deleting stuff that was unnecessary that you wouldn't even see within the camera. And that just helped me to kind of stay focused on like one area throughout the process. The next thing I did was I brought Gerald into iClone and I set up his walk cycle. So sometimes I'll use walk cycles that come from iClone itself. Sometimes I use some from Mixamo. iClone is really cool because you can bring like motion capture data in from different places, and usually it's pretty good about like retargeting it onto that animation, and then you can export that out and just apply it to your character within Blender. So I applied this walk cycle that was stock in iClone to Gerald, and then he gets to the end right in front of the coolers. He pauses, so it's like the end of the walk cycle, and then I added a motion of him idling and kind of like looking around seeing what he's going to get at the cooler. I exported that out and brought that back into Blender, into my scene, and applied that motion the same way I did with the skateboard scene onto Gerald within the store. And then I started to kind of work with the cameras a little bit, just to fine tweak them a little more so I could make sure that it looked and felt how I wanted it to look. And then once I had all of that set up, my animation and my scene and my cameras the way I wanted it, I then started to build out the scene with the boxes on the shelves and the bag of chips. So I use Substance Painter, and with Substance Painter, they have a website that comes with a bunch of different models that you can use. So I downloaded like some cans, some bottles, some bags of chips, and brought those into the scene. And then I just used the array modifier to like duplicate them on the shelves. And it looked very uniform. It might be like 2x8, like in a rectangle, and this is perfectly sitting on the shelves. But I knew that I would eventually apply that modifier and then go through the meshes and like delete some, rotate some, and make it look more organic, like somebody had just put stuff on the shelves and then other people came through and pulled it off and like left it in disarray. So once I had that done, and in there I was labeling each box or bag of chips as I went through. So it would be like bag 1, bag 2, bag 3, or it'd be like box 1, box 2, box 3. And that way, when I took it into Substance Painter to texture it, I can have it already set up to where I can just select box 1, add color to it, add some scribbles to it, and then I would name something like football head chips or moving football head chips, something like that, or Helga snacks. And you don't really see it unless you look really closely, but I just wanted to kind of throw those little Easter eggs in there. Even at the end, when he walks down at the end of the aisle, you see like Gerald's on the cereal box, and then on the right side you see the Powerline logo, right, from another project I recently did. And then when you bring those hand-drawn scribbly textures back into Blender, when I'm using my Toon Shader setup, again, it adds the halftones and the scribble or the paint strokes to it. It just gives it like a really, really cool look. And then finally, I just went through and really focused on the lighting and really getting the feel to look how I wanted it to feel. So for instance, I had to use some light linking on certain parts so I can add light to hit his shoes and legs more than the floor. Changing the roughness on the floor so you kind of get like a reflection of him and the cooler coming off of the floor, and just really trying to get like a intimate feel of him walking through that store at the end of his day. The next scene was outside of Arnold's home, Sunset Arms. So Arnold in the show, he lives with his grandparents, so part of Gerald's day usually is hanging out with Arnold. So I wanted to show him and Arnold together in some capacity within the animation. So I was like, it would be cool if Gerald and Arnold were outside talking, and it almost looks like Gerald's telling this elaborate story and Arnold's like kind of pushing back on him, like there's no way this happened or you did all of this or something like that. When I modeled this scene, I just wanted to again focus on key features that would be visible within the camera's perspective. So the steps, the railing, the brick facade, the green door, and I knew that it would just be showing them standing in front of the front of the building, but I also wanted to show enough to where you know that this is Sunset Arms, this is Gerald's home. So that was my thinking behind modeling what I modeled for the scene. So I first started with modeling those elements, and then I adjusted the lighting to experiment just so I can kind of see where the shadows would fall off, how the characters kind of looked interacting with each other to give it like that late afternoon, early evening, sun is basically going down look. For the building elements themselves, I just basically box modeled everything using array modifiers and mirror modifiers, modeling one side so that it would duplicate over to the other side. And once I had everything modeled, I UV unwrapped everything and labeled them with texture slots. So for instance, like stairs, concrete, side railing concrete, front door, sidewalk concrete. Just give them all different names so that when I brought them into Substance Painter, I can just select each part and paint over it. Within Substance Painter, the process was pretty much the same as the other scenes. I would just go through each section, add some paint layers, and build up different layers to give it like that hand-painted comic book scribbly look, and then bring that back into Blender where I applied that node setup for the toon shader that I've been using for the other scenes as well. And then for the character animation, I brought in Gerald and Arnold to iClone, and it was the same process. I applied some motion capture animations to each, got those how I wanted to, made some adjustments, and then brought those back into Blender and applied those animations onto my character. And then finally, I added some simple camera animation. So for this scene, you don't really see their faces, you just kind of see like their waist or so down. So you kind of see the camera animate in and out a little bit, left and right, and just give it like a handheld camera look. And when you add the camera Shakeify on top of that, it kind of brings that all together and really sells that look. By now, I'm like 3 scenes into like this fan-made spin-off. So then I'm starting to think about Gerald and his personality and the things that he's into. So there was a episode that I recently saw where it starts off with Gerald on stage doing like some slam poetry. So I imagined him like being a couple years older, like in middle school, maybe wanting to make some beats, perform at a talent show. So it's going to start off with him in his room working on the beat. So I wanted to model like his room and him sitting at a desk working on a drum machine. So in real life, I would be like 3 years older than Gerald. So at that same time, around like 96, 97, 98, I would have been listening to a lot of like So Def Bass All Stars, Notorious B.I.G., Missy Elliott, all these different kinds of people. And I wanted to kind of incorporate some of those styles and flavors into like what he might have been listening to, right? So I modeled out his bedroom, and then I found a stylized TR-909 drum machine on Sketchfab that worked really well. I kind of liked the way it was modeled and over exaggerated knobs and just the size of it. So it really worked perfectly. So I put that into Substance Painter, brought in the original base paint layer, and then started to like add my own flavor on top of it, like repaint over a lot of the elements and tie it into the overall aesthetic of the other scenes that I had built out. I then brought that desk and drum machine model into iClone with Gerald's model, his eye avatar, and I added this idle animation from iClone of a person like sitting at a desk and then almost tapping on the keyboard. So once I brought that in, I had to make some adjustments using the motion layer and make sure that his fingers looked like it was touching the pads or the knobs or whatever the case may be. So I was just refining the animation, making sure that everything was selling the motion of him like clicking on the drum machine and making the beat. So once I had that done, I brought that back into Blender and applied it, and then just really experimented with a few different camera angles. I think this scene I used the most camera angles out of all the scenes. I think I might export like 4 or 5 sequences for this one, but it was the same concept, creating motion within the camera using keyframe animation, panning in and out left and right, and then using the camera Shakeify plugin. The next scene I did was the talent show scene. So for the talent show scene, I knew that it didn't need a ton of detail. Like I don't have the characters say like Helga or anybody else, so I didn't need to necessarily build out like the seats in the auditorium. And if I'm keeping with the theme of everything kind of close and intimate, showing like his lower body or showing his arms or showing him from a distance, I knew that for this scene then I wouldn't need a lot of detail. So what I did was I modeled the stage and kind of like the wall that would be around the stage, and then I added like 2 layers of curtains with a model that I had purchased a while back. And then I focused primarily on the lighting. I knew that since I was using a lot of those close-up camera angles, or camera angles I was focusing like on his lower body or him from the side with a shallow depth of field, that the detail really wouldn't need to be that great. It would just need to relay visually the information of where he was at, which would be like a theater with the curtains in the background. So once I set all that up, the main light on Gerald was a spotlight, and then I animated the spotlight to follow him throughout the scene. And then I added a few more lights and used light linking so that it would just throw a little bit more brightness onto him himself, but wouldn't necessarily like hit the stage. And then I took the stage and the curtains and the substance painter, and the same process, like scribbly spray painted textures on top, and then brought those back in with the Toon Shader node setup within Blender, and I was pretty much done with this scene. This scene probably was the one that I made the quickest because it wasn't like super complex. And then finally was taking it into iClone, adding those animations of like someone like singing or rapping, and then applying it to Gerald and setting up my final cameras and lighting and rendering out that scene.